Teddy's Button, written by Amy Lefevre. Chapter 1. An Antagonist. He stood in the center of a little crowd of village boys. His golden head was bare in the blazing sun, but the crop of curls seemed thick enough to protect him from its rays, and he was far too engrossed in his occupation to heed any discomfort from the heat. A slim, delicate little lad, with a finely cut face and blue eyes that by turn would sparkle with animation and then settle into a dreamy wistfulness, with a deep, faraway look in them. They were dancing and flashing with excitement now, and his whole frame was quivering with enthusiasm. With his head thrown back and tongue, hand, and foot all in motion, he seemed to have his audience completely spellbound, and they listened with open eyes and mouths to his oration. With one hand, he was fingering a large brass button, which figured conspicuously in the center of his small waistcoat, and this button was the subject of his theme. "My father, he rushed forward. 'Come on, men, we'll save the old colors!' And they shouted, 'Hurrah!' as they made after him. There were guns going, and shells flying, and swords flashing and hacking away, and the enemy poured on with fiery red faces and gnashing teeth. My father drew his sword, and no one could stand against him. No one. He cut and slashed, and heads and arms and legs rolled off as quickly as lightning, one after the other. He got up to the colors, and with a shout, he plunged his sword right through the body of an enemy who had stolen them. The enemy fell stone dead. My father seized the colors and looked around. He was alone. The other soldiers had been beaten back, but was he afraid? No. He gave a loud hurrah, picked up his sword, and fought his way back, the enemies hard after him. It was a race for life, and he ran backward the whole way. He wasn't going to turn his back to the enemy. He pressed on, shouting hurrah, until he got to his own side again, and then he reached his colonel. "Captain dead, sir? I've got the colors." He saluted as he said it, and then dropped dead himself at the colonel's feet, the blood gushing out of his heart, and over his clothes, and over this button. The little orator paused as he sunk his voice to a tragic whisper, then raised it again as he added triumphantly, "And 30 bullets and 6 swords had gone through my father's body. That was something like a soldier." "Oh, I say," murmured a small skeptic from this crowd. "It was 20 bullets last time. Make it 50, Teddy." "And that's the story of my button," pursued the boy, ignoring with scorn this last remark. "And did your father have only one button to his coat?" The voice was a strange one, and the boy turned around to meet the curious gaze of a sturdy little damsel, who had, unnoticed, joined the group. She was not dressed as an ordinary village child, but in a little rough serge sailor suit, with a large hat to match, set well back in a quantity of loose dark hair. A rosy-cheeked, square-set little figure she was, and her brown eyes, fringed with black lashes, looked straight at Teddy with something of defiance and scorn in their glance. Though at first a little taken aback, Teddy rose to the occasion. "One button," he said with emphasis. "The coat was sent to my mother with only one button left on. And if you," here he turned upon his questioner with a little fierceness, "if you had been through such a bloody battle and killed so many men, you would have burst and lost all your buttons and not had one left, like father." There was a round of applause at this, but the small maiden remained undaunted. "Is that a true story you told?" she demanded with a severity in her tone. "Of course it's true," was the indignant shout of all. "Then I tell you, boy, I can't believe a word of it." And with set, determined lips, she turned on her heels and walked away, having sown seeds of anger and resentment in more than one boyish breast. "Who is she?" asked Teddy, as tired and exhausted by his recital. He threw himself on the grass to rest. One of the bigger boys answered him, "I saw her come yesterday in a cab from the town to Old Soul at the turnpike. She and her mother, I reckon, they had 2 carpetbags in a box and a polly parrot in a cage. I counted them myself, for I was having a ride behind, and the woman called Sol father, so the little one must be his granddaughter. Perhaps they've come from America, suggested a small urchin, capering around on his hands and feet. Parrots always come over the sea, you know. She didn't believe me, murmured Teddy, chewing a wisp of grass meditatively. Gals are never any good. If she had been a boy, you would have fought her, but I shouldn't care for anything like her, Ted. Ted turned his face upward to the speaker. No, I couldn't fought her, Sam. If she had been a boy, I promised my mother I won't fight again until she lets me. You see, I fought 4 boys in 1 week last time, and she says she won't have it. I don't see that if it's right for soldiers to fight, why it isn't right for boys. I don't think there are any fellows left for you to fight with, so you're pretty safe. Besides, it was only Tom Larkin who set them on to try to get your button from you, and he has gone off to another part of the country now. I think perhaps, went on Teddy slowly as he turned over on his back and looked up at the clear blue sky above him, that I wasn't quite true about the bullets. I think it was 6 bullets and 3 sword cuts. I forget when they tell it how many it was, but she said she didn't believe a word. 5 o'clock struck by the old church clock close by. Teddy was on his feet and in an instant, and with a wild whoop, shouted as he was scudding across the green, his curls flying in the wind and his little feet hardly seeming to touch the ground. There was none in the village as quick-footed as Teddy, and for daring feats and downright pluck, he held the foremost place. Perhaps this accounted for his popularity. Perhaps it was his marvelous appetite for telling stories, many of them wild productions from his fertile brain. But certain it was that he was the pet and the darling of the village, and none as yet had resisted his sway. Over the green, up a shady lane, across 2 fields, and then breathless and panting, Teddy paused before an old-fashioned farmhouse. He passed his hands lightly through his curls, pulled himself up with a jerk, and then quietly and sedately opened a latch door and entered the long, low-roofed kitchen. There was something very restful in the scene. A square, substantial table covered with a white cloth, in the center a large bowl of roses and honeysuckles, homemade bread and golden butter, a glass dish of honey in its comb, and a plate of fresh watercress, and a currant loaf completed the simple fare. Presiding at the tea tray was a stern, forbidding-looking woman of 60 or more. Opposite her was seated her son, the master of the farm, a heavy-faced, sleepy-looking man, and at his side, facing the door, sat Teddy's mother. A sweet, gentle-faced young woman she was, with the same deep blue eyes as her little son. She bore no resemblance to the older woman, and looked as she indeed was superior to her surroundings. 2 years ago she had come with her child to make her home amongst her husband's people, and though at first her mother-in-law, Mrs. Platt, was inclined to look upon her contemptuously as a poor, delicate, useless creature, time proved to her that for steady, quiet work no one could eclipse her daughter-in-law. Young Mrs. John, as she was called, was now her right hand, and the dairy work of the farm was given over entirely to her. "Late again, you young scamp," was the stern greeting of his grandmother as Teddy appeared on the scene. The boy looked at her with a twinkle in his eyes, put his hand to his forehead, and gave her a military salute. "Sorry," was all he said, as he slipped into the chair that was waiting for him. "What have you been doing, sonny?" asked the young mother, whose eyes had brightened at the sight of him. "Telling father's story," replied Teddy with electricity. A shadow came over his mother's face. Her lips took a distressing curve, but she said nothing, only occupying herself with attending to the child's wants. Your father was never late for his meals, the grandmother put in with asperity. Never, Granny? Not when he was a boy? I shall always be on time when I'm a soldier. Better begin now, then. Bad habits like weeds grow space. Okay, here's a picture. Don't know how well you can see it, but you can see Teddy saluting his grandmother and mother. Teddy had no answer for this. His mouth was full of bread and butter, and he did not speak until the meal was over. Then, while tea was being taken away by the woman, he turned to his uncle, who, pulling out a pipe from his pocket, sat down by the open door to smoke. "Uncle Jake!" A grunt was the only response, but that was sufficient. The two perfectly understood each other, and a minute after Teddy was perched on his knees. "I'm wondering if I can have an enemy," the boy proceeded, folding his small arms and looking up at his uncle steadily. "All good people had enemies in the Bible, and I don't have one, and I would like to have a good downright enemy." "To fight?" asked his uncle. "To carry on with, you know. He would lay traps for me, and I would for him, like David and Saul. We should have a fine time of it, and then perhaps if we did something dreadfully wrong, Mother would let me fight him just once in a while. Don't you think that would be nice?" "Fighting isn't the only grand thing in this world. Peace is grander," was the slow response to this appeal. "That's what Mother says. She made me learn this morning, 'Blessed are the peacemakers.' But you must have an enemy to make peace with, and I don't have one." There was silence. The uncle puffed away at his pipe. He was a good man, and had more brains than his appearances warranted. But Teddy's speeches were often a sore puzzle to him. The boy continued in a slow, thoughtful tone. "I saw someone today, and I feel it might be an enemy. But she's a girl. Men don't fight with women." "I would rather tackle a man than a woman any day. They are powerful enemies sometimes, lad. And what has this young maid done to you?" "She said," and Teddy's eyes grew bright while the blood rushed into his cheeks, "she didn't believe a word of Father's story, not a word of it, and she laughed and walked away." That was going it strong. "Who is she, to talk so?" "She's a stranger. Sam said she'd come to live with an old soul at the turnpike." "That must be Grace's child," said Mr. Platt, coming and joining in the conversations. Wait a minute. Oh, sorry. "That must be Grace's child," said old Mrs. Platt, coming in and joining in the conversation. "I heard she was coming to stay with her father this summer, and I'm glad of it too. The old man is very lonely. I suppose her husband is at sea again." What is her husband?" inquired Teddy's mother, as, with work in her hand, she came out and took a seat in the old-fashioned porch. "A sailor. Grace was always a roving nature herself. She never would settle down quiet and take a husband from these parts. She was a maid to our squire lady then, and went to foreign parts with her. But folks say she's steadied down now wonderfully. They've been living at Portsmouth, she and her little girl." That's chapter 1. Sorry for mispronunciations, but I hope you enjoy the story, and I will continue to read it. Thank you.